Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and welcome back to Place Parts, Episode 6. Today we're here in a mixture of rain and snow in a little village near Newbury called Bagnor on the River Lambron in West Berkshire. And this is another purposeful, idyllic environment to bring us back to one interpretation of place. So far we've talked about a lot of things in the series. The storybook versus the real, how time is an element of place, how our expectations of place define our experience. And I ended the last episode with the tool of context keys from the book. And you may recall those are familiarity, congruity, and integrity. It's a three-part test to run through as part of the learn method to decide whether a solution to accommodate change is the right solution for the right place. Rather than speak with these words that some of you may find a bit abstract, I wanted to ground truth them with someone who's a long-time contributor to the place dialogue, and actually someone who has an easy-to-use tool in any community to help residents understand where their community has been, where it is now, and where it's going. And we'll hear from Dr. Katherine Loflin in a second. So, Katherine, it's great to see you. We've been doing things like this for far too long, I'm afraid, going way back to, as I recall the progression, back when it was possible for guys like me to write for the Atlantic on the side. I interviewed you for the Atlantic about what was then kind of groundbreaking. It was a radio show, remember radio, about placemaking, and it's probably about the only radio show that's ever been done about that topic.
That's right.
But Place Parts is a series of short videos to expand upon the principles in our new book. And as I think you know, you actually you've got a couple of pages in the book because of the work you did way back when at the Knight Foundation as principal investigator on the Soul of the Community project, which perhaps people in the placemaking movement today, 12, 13 years later, don't necessarily know how groundbreaking that was about understanding place attachment and many more attributes of place and leading with place. Well, tell me what you think a smart community or a smart city is with some of these fundamental principles in mind.
Well, you quoted me correctly in the book where I talk about I have a completely different take on a smart city. It's the deliberative city. It is that city that pays attention to what makes them who they are. I mean, it sounds kind of squishy and non-scientific, but one of the things we saw coming out of the Soul of the Community project was that, we found out what drives people's attachment to a place. And then it was like I released the Kraken around social offerings, aesthetics, and openness everywhere. And it was hard to get the bull back in the stable, because what also has to go with that is not just this randomization of doing that without being anchored in the concept of context and place.
And that's my favorite word. Yeah,
of course, exactly.
So I ended my last episode with some questions about context, but before that, I made the point on a high street, a main street in an English town where I live now, pleading to people not to just stop with the word authentic.
Yes.
Or authenticity.
Yes.
And you've done some interesting work after your career at the Knight Foundation and actually as a place-making consultant, as a city doctor. You've gone on to do some really interesting things that are community-based. Amazing Place Productions, is that a way to authenticity? I mean, what's authenticity to you, and how do you help communities understand what and who they are?
It's such an important thing, and it does get, there's certain things in our world that are used so often that they lose all meaning. Community engagement, social capital, and authenticity. I mean, it's like, oh, okay, we all got that at the same conference, so we're all going to talk about it, but we're not going to know what it means, and we're not going to know how to cultivate it or do anything with it. And so one of the things I had discovered along the way is how powerful stories and the stories of a place are in translating to people what is the authentic root of this place? What are we based on? Even if we weren't here, and of course, none of us were, to help create it. It's amazing to me that places continue, as I do more and more productions that tell the story of a place, there are still remnants of that history, of that story in that narrative. And so sometimes the best way to pull that out is to show people sort of, this is the story of this place that you now love, that you now call home, the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, this is not a tourism ad for places. I live in the South, in the States. And so to tell a true story, you have to go to places where we're not at our best moments, and we're still not at our best moments in some of that.
I'm afraid none of us are at our best moments right now.
Exactly. And so it's about a true story of how a place came to be and how it still influences us today as I don't know, almost a cultural anthropology guide to how we got here. And people fall in love more with their place, is my experience, being able to relate to it in that way. And then they feel part of a history that's still being told, because now we're here and we're creating that history.
Right. And I think you put out some of these concepts in your book, Place Match, as well, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think some of the things you do help those stories come back out. It's not just, I mean, I've learned around the world now that that's not just cutesy stuff.
And you know what, I mean, I can give a very granular example of that. Telling the story, so doing these productions, I'm right in the middle of writing another one for the place I live now, no pressure. But from previous productions, people see these shows and they come up to you and they say things like that. I lived on a street named after the founder of the town. Like, I had no idea. I will tell everybody who comes visits me, this isn't somewhere. So we always wonder about the street names of a town. And they're usually tied to some way to the history. And sometimes it's a big character and sometimes it's a little character, but they all are still there.
Right.
And they make up the place. Right. And so people start to feel a sense of pride around a street name because they can tell the history of the name or of this land. I was telling someone else that their home was literally where troops walked on their way to launch the Revolutionary War,
right?
Battle of Algiers, and they know it.
No matter where we are in the world, some of us are more restricted than others right now, apparently, from what I see where you are. But do you have some very quick prognostication about how all this place stuff plays into rolling out of the pandemic? Because the former prime minister here, Tony Blair, just wrote an excellent piece that say, hey, this is really only the beginning, for one, and we're not at all done yet, by the way.
Right.
There's still some nasty numbers out there. There's still a lot to accomplish before any level of immunity is really established.
Yeah.
Do you have a couple of sentences on how all you've done might play out in the changing world here?
Well, I just finished the first large-scale attachment research since COVID, and I can tell you that things changed in what drives attachment to place. And a short answer is social offerings has been replaced by social capital.
And what's that mean?
That means that humans remain to be these social beings, that when social infrastructure is removed, they go back to one-on-one networks.
Yeah.
And that's what's driving their love of place, is still being able to provide that for them.
That's tremendous, Seth. Well, we'll circle back, and
Yes.
I'm sure we'll see you quote unquote soon. And thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Chuck.
I hope you've enjoyed our trip to what looked like a bit of an idyllic setting in its own right in North Carolina to hear from Katherine. And next time we'll be going back to look at tools that speak to place in perhaps an even broader way. So we'll see you in a couple of days. Thanks again.